Good morning. We're at the property committee meeting. I'm just going to kick this off. This should be a relatively short meeting. We have Doug Taylor from Dewey with us. We are going to be discussing three professional services in relation to the middle school additions and update project. And normally you would see this come through a board motion meeting, but to make in the time sensitive nature of this, instead of waiting for another 2 weeks to get these projects going, we had discussed coming to the property committee to discuss these normal professional services. This is nothing out of the ordinary as we go through this project in the scope of the project. So I'm going to hand it over to Doug to talk about the recommendations for the three professional services. And then if Craig needs to jump in to, discuss this as well, please do so at that time. So I will hand it over to Doug.
Thank you, Kara. And thank you to everyone for this last minute property committee meeting. I appreciate it. So there are three professional services that we'd like to get moving as soon as we can, primarily because of weather conditions. And we want to get some of this done so that the engineers can do the work they need to do. So I'll explain these. The first one that I'm holding in front of me is the utility locating services. So we did have a civil engineer do an existing condition survey of the project, and they identified where many of the utilities currently are on the site. However, there are other utilities that we know are on the site that they haven't been able to identify because they don't do all of the locating that a service like this would do. And the bigger concern is a lot of these utilities appear to be within the areas where we're going to be constructing our additions, and primarily the auditorium. So we want to, and even the new entry addition. So we want to get the utility locating service out. They'll do a complete survey of the site. They'll use penetrating radars and other equipment to locate utilities that are on our site. Again, so we're eliminating surprises when we start construction. The last thing we want to do is find, there's some high voltage power that's running through the site that we know there's a yard box and we saw the power coming in and coming out, but there's no idea where it's coming from and going to necessarily. So this service would identify those things. And if it's something that has to be relocated, we can then document it and bid it and not have a surprise and a change order during construction. So we'll do our best to identify those utilities. So that is the first of the three. And we've worked with both of the companies that we sought proposals from, and GPRS is the low proposal for that. So if there's any questions on that piece. No. Okay. So then
I'm sorry, sir, can I just ask, just on the pricing, I'm not as familiar with this as I should be.
Sure.
What goes into the location that I guess creates this sort of cost? I mean, it is what it is. I'm not necessarily quibbling with the numbers. I'm just kind of wondering why it just seems awfully expensive for what I picture to be somebody just kind of running something over the ground.
Well, they're gonna run over every square foot of the entire site. So they're going to go from property line to property line up to the buildings. They're going to identify where utilities live. They're then going to go back and someone's going to document all those locations, and they'll give us a digital drawing that shows where all those items are. And then we'll share those files with the civil engineer so they can put those on his drawing. So there is more that goes into it than just the site investigations, although it will be a couple of guys for at least a day or two to do that work, plus then the documentation and delivery to us. So the numbers are within reason of prior studies of similar scale.
Is that pretty standard?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we actually did the same thing with the guy who didn't get the project over at the Upper Dublin Municipal Complex just last year. So we're pretty familiar with the numbers here.
Oh, that's helpful to be sure. If just one last question, if I could, if utilities are found and they do need to be relocated, does any of the costs, do any of the costs that are outlined here go into that, or is that a completely separate cost that will be estimated and borne?
No, what it will allow us to do is identify those utilities, those that might be in the way of our building footprint or other site features. And then the engineering team will document those relocations as part of the project. We'll include those as part of the phasing plan. And now the work is included in the scope and will be competitively bid. Right.
Okay.
So, and it doesn't mean that something won't show up later that, no one found or saw. Things do happen, but this will get the majority of those utilities identified. You don't want to find it during construction because then it affects your schedule. The change order will definitely have, some cost on it that you wouldn't have if you competitively bid it up front, a small percentage. So we want to try to find as many things as we can through investigations up front.
Indeed. All right. Thank you for the explanation.
Yep.
Sure.
I would just add too, Mr. Needleman, they do a lot of investigative work with existing blueprints. So, the site has been there a long time. There's water service, electric service, gas service, stormwater, sanitary. So they'll take a combination of all those old blueprints, and that's where they start to form their basis of work. So they say, oh, we know a water line is sort of close to here. Is it under the auditorium? Is the stormwater pipes under where we're going to, do construction? And they'll go out with this ground penetrating radar and verify that. So, and as they do it, they may find, the site's been there a long time, an old sewer or something that's been there that's not on a print that, it's like, oh boy, we really need to dig this up and find out what it is it still active, things like that. So.
No, and I appreciate that. And am I right that there is the potential for some cost savings up front, because if utility lines are found now, it's much less expensive and easier to relocate them than maybe puncturing something later on and having something go really wrong.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And
Thank
Mr.
you.
Taylor, just one follow-up question on this. Just looking at the cost breakdowns on page 2, I just want to make sure we're comparing the same thing. It looks like there's 2 different line items
Yes.
from each of them. Are they talking about the same optional services there, or are we actually getting a different proposal from?
No, this was apples to apples. Yeah, they're the same optional. So what we had was doing work in one area of the project where we know we're going to work, and then getting the entire site surveyed so that the district has a record of what's happening on that site for any future work that could take place. So
Okay.
we decided to move forward with the entire site based on the numbers.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Okay, so moving on, the next item is the geothermal testing services. So this is for our proposed mechanical design. We'd like to, in an effort to continue to utilize some sustainable practices on this project, extend the geothermal well field for the new additions. To do so, we need to perform some testing. We know the area that the well field lives in is functioning, but we don't know for certain that the area where we propose to put the new geothermal well field will perform in the same fashion. So we'll under this proposal, Morrison will go out and they will actually drill a test well, one test well that will be to anywhere between 200 and 500 feet deep. Again, that's the reason for the testing, to see what depth we get to with the well. And they'll actually put in a casing, and they'll bring in a small boiler that they'll set up on site, and they'll do a conductivity test to see that we're getting the temperatures that we need to get for a functioning mechanical system through the testing. And then when they're finished, they'll actually cap this well off below ground and restore the site. And that well will become one of the multiple wells we'll have as part of the final design. So while we are paying for them to mobilize and perform this test well, we also benefit by having one of the wells drilled. And again, if we find out that it doesn't provide us with the conductivity that we need to extend the field, then we have to look into an alternate HVAC design for the project. So this is, again, doing our homework, making sure that we identify how deep the wells will be, so that when somebody bids this job, they know they're going to be drilling X number of wells at 300 feet, right? And they can price the project accordingly. And we know that we have a design that's going to perform well for the long term. I should say that Morrison is the contractor who, and I'm using Upper Dublin as an example because they're right next door for the most part. They just performed a test well for us on the new township building that's going to be taking place there. So, and they've done other work for us, so we're familiar with them as well. Any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you for sharing that, because I'm just looking at this, looking at the delta between the bid amounts. So my question was going to be, what is your experience with them? So that's helpful. I mean, obviously, there's other things that go into price differences, but we want to make sure the low bidder is capable, as I know that's what you do. So thank you for that.
Yep, it's a fair question. The number is significantly lower. Morrison is an older gentleman who performs these services in a much smaller scale than Allied Environmental. So I think his overhead is less, and he does a fine job. So we're in good shape.
Great, thank you.
Okay, then the last proposal is for the geotechnical investigations and construction testing and special inspection services. Now, we're only looking to move forward with the initial $25,000 of this proposal. The construction testing and special inspection services wouldn't be billed unless we actually move forward with the project and we actually have construction testing services as a part of that project. But we like to bid this together because the firm that performs the initial investigations is usually the firm we prefer to have perform the testing afterwards, since it's, they perform the initial conditions kind of reporting to keep it under one firm. So we competitively solicited bids or proposals in that fashion. And again, we've worked with all of these firms that we solicited proposals from, and would recommend that we move forward with this service. Now, what we'll do with David Blackmore in this first phase, there's a series of test pits and borings and water infiltration testing that needs to take place. So first, the water infiltration testing is basically an infiltration test. The DEP wants us to lose our groundwater on our site in today's design practices, best management practices, versus the old days where we put a large basin in, collect the water, and slowly discharge it off the site. We want to allow this water to infiltrate back into the ground when we can, or put an underground stormwater basin in where the water sits and then slowly trickles into the ground. So they'll do infiltration testing to make sure the area that we propose for the underground infiltration bed actually will perform as necessary. And the township will look for these reports when we go through the engineering, submittal package for this project. The other piece of this are some test pits that will be dug to determine the soils conditions for foundations. We need to make sure that the soils conditions will allow for the bearing capacity. So we want to understand what the soils conditions are. The probes and the borings will help us understand the geology. So it'll give us a profile of the actual boring. It'll show us what the soils conditions are till we find suitable bearing. It would also help us identify if there's any rock below ground, and if there is, then we have to develop the bid strategies for the rock removal, make sure that we provide this information to the contractors. In fact, this information is ultimately in the specification. When the contractors bid the job, this information is available to them to see what the geology is on the site. So when they bid it, they can put accurate numbers together as well. But we would, and if there's soft soils or soils that aren't suitable, we have to then document a soils exchange type package. So we are putting in suitable subsurface stone to bear our building on. So this is all necessary work up front for us to identify, the subsurface conditions. Craig, do you have anything else on that?
No, that's good. I think that's a good explanation. But again, it is necessary. Again, the township will require all this. So and it will be in the bidding documents. So the more documentation you have in your bidding documents, the better. There's less chance for change orders, unforeseen conditions. So we're good.
Okay,
Any other questions on that?
yeah.
No, I'm good.
Thank you
Thank-
again for giving us your time this morning. I appreciate it. I know it's last minute, but we want to get this started before we see a large amount of snow on the ground, and I think we're going to duck it this weekend, hopefully. So
Thank you, Doug, and
Thank you
Craig.
for coming
I just have a quick question. Well, so from our last meeting, I do remember when we kind of talked about this and the additions, and I just want to re-echo something I said at the last meeting. I'm not an engineer. I'm not an architect. I'm just speaking from a parent perspective of things like being on the site and drop-offs and pickups and seeing where the kids are walking and more of like people flow and traffic flow, and making sure that I'm sure like all the designs, of the building, they're gorgeous and they're designed well, of making sure from a perspective of people who have actually physically been on the school grounds and watched where people are in the traffic of pedestrians and cars, and making sure that all those original designs still flow and still work, so that we don't like design something beautiful, but then after we execute down the road, we're like, oh wait, why did we put the entrance there? That doesn't work, or this doesn't work.
yep, as they say, form follows function, right? So we will continue to follow the lead of the district and the concerns that you have. We work closely with the design team. We share all of those concerns that you raise with them, and we'll develop the best solutions that we can. In fact, we will be providing some update on the proposed work shortly. And I respect that. And you raise a good point relative to, and Dr. Yannicone was clear on this from the get-go, that we do need to be cautious with these testing exercises, making sure that we have fencing around the areas that could be impacted by students. So we'll work with Craig. We'll make sure that we get any fencing up at areas where we would have any areas that remain disturbed after we're finished or during, so that we don't have any concerns with students mixing with these activities.
And not just safety, but more of, it's already a hot mess if you've been there for drop off and pick up. So I do get nervous that you could make something that's already bad worse. So like I said, just to have people physically there who have observed on more than one time of what it's really like on a normal, typical day, to see the pain.
Yep, understood.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any more questions about this? So I just want to talk about procedure for a minute. Again, at the beginning of this meeting, I talked about, because of the time-sensitive nature of this and to keep the flow of the project going, we wanted to have the committee meeting to bring it forward in front of the committee members. Normally we would go to the board and this would happen at the board, but we want to do a ratification at the board meeting so that we don't stop the progress of being able to stop the work that these professionals need to do to keep us on schedule. So our recommendation at the board will be through the property committee. If you all agree that they can move forward before and then ratify it at the board meeting with these three proposals. Is that okay? And do you all understand that?
Yeah,
I'm on board.
Yeah, I'm clear on that, and I'm on board as well.
Okay,
I'm on board.
good. Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
Kara. I'm sorry, Kara. We should note that these fees are all part of the soft cost,
Okay.
that we included in the total project budget. So these are all part of that project cost.
Yes, not new money.
Right.
Right.
Thank you.
All right, that's all we have. So I thank you guys for the quick turnaround on this meeting and your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks,
Have a great
everybody.
weekend.
you.
Have a good weekend, guys. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you. Take care.
everybody.